I couldn't sleep that night. That's how it started. Not with a spuffate, not with a discovery, not with some dramatic moment I could point to later and say, that's when everything changed. It started with insomnia at 2 in the morning, a hotel corridor with bad lighting, and the sound of a door clicking shut. We were in Scottsdale. A 5-day leadership retreat for senior partners at the firm, the kind of thing the company had been doing every other year since before I even joined. I'd been going for 19 years. 19 years of the same conference rooms, the same golf scramble on day 3, the same speech from whoever was heading up strategy that quarter. My wife had come along twice before, back when spouses were still invited. This year the company had quietly changed the policy. Spouses welcome again. Budget was good. Morale needed a lift after 2 rounds of restructuring. My wife, we'd been married 31 years, met when I was 32, she was 28. I was a project manager then. She was finishing her master's in education. We built everything together. The house in Naperville, 3 kids, savings, a life that, from the outside, looked like what you were supposed to aim for. I had no reason to be suspicious of anything. I remembered the hotel room. It was on the 4th floor facing the pool. The air conditioning ran too cold, and I'd been waking up in the middle of the night the whole trip. That particular night, around 2:15, I gave up trying to sleep. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt and decided to walk down to the lobby vending machines. My wife was asleep. At least that's what I thought. The elevator was slow, so I took the stairs at the end of the hall. Room 418 was 4 doors down from ours. I know that number because I've thought about it probably 10,000 times since. The door to 418 was just closing when I stepped into the corridor. I almost didn't register it. It's a hotel. Doors open and close all night. But then I saw her standing there, her hand still touching the door handle as it clicked into the frame. She was in the silk robe she'd packed for the trip. The one I'd watched her fold and put into her suitcase 4 days ago in our bedroom at home. Her hair was down. She didn't see me at first. When she turned and did, her face went through something I had never seen before. It moved fast, whatever it was. Fear, recognition, a kind of recalibration. And then, before I could say a word or even fully understand what I was looking at, she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic smile, a calm one, like she was greeting me across a restaurant. Couldn't sleep either, she said. I didn't answer. I looked at the door. I looked at her. I looked at her. I looked at the number on the door. I knew whose room that was. His name was Stuart. My direct supervisor for the past 11 years. The man who had written the recommendation letter that got me promoted to senior partner. The man who had stood at my 60th birthday party 18 months ago and given a toast about integrity, about what it meant to be a man who showed up every day for the people who depended on him. He talked about me, but standing in that corridor at 2 in the morning, I understood that he'd really been talking about himself, about the image he wanted people to hold. I turned around and walked back to my room. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, listening to the air conditioner run, listening to the door to our room open quietly about 20 minutes later, listening to the rustle of sheets as she got back into bed, listening to her breathing slow and even out like nothing had happened. I thought about a lot of things that night. I thought about Stuart's wife, a woman named Beverly who had sent us a Christmas card every year for a decade, who had once driven 2 hours to bring food to our house when my wife had her appendix out. I thought about my youngest daughter, who had called her Aunt Bev until she was in high school. I thought about my son, who had interned at the firm 3 summers ago because Stuart had personally arranged it. I thought about my own face in that hallway, about whether I had shown anything about what she had seen when she looked at me. I thought about the smile. That smile bothered me more than anything else. I kept coming back to it, In 31 years of marriage, I had seen my wife scared, I had seen her guilty, I had seen her ashamed. I'd seen all of it. That smile was none of those things. That smile was something I didn't have a word for yet. It was practiced, like she had rehearsed for exactly this scenario and was running the playbook. At 6 in the morning, I got up, got dressed, and went to breakfast. The conference opened at 8. I sat through 4 hours of presentations about market positioning and talent retention. Stewart gave a 15-minute segment on company values. I watched him from 3 rows back. He was relaxed. He told a joke. People laughed. I watched him the way you watch something you're trying to identify. The way you look at a shadow and try to figure out what's casting it. At lunch, I sat with a colleague from the Denver office, a man named Everett, who had been my closest friend at the firm for about 12 years. We'd met at a training program back in 2013. He was a quiet man, careful with words, the kind of person who didn't say much but meant everything he said. I had not planned to tell him anything, but halfway through a plate of food I wasn't tasting, I heard myself say, "I think I walked into something last night." Everett put down his fork. I told him what I'd seen, not all of it. Just the corridor, the robe, the door, the number. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long do you think it's been going on?" I hadn't let myself ask that question yet. Hearing it out loud felt like stepping off a curb I hadn't seen. "I don't know," I said. He nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know that either." He picked his fork back up. "Don't do anything before you get home. Whatever you're thinking about doing right now, wait." I took that advice. The remaining 2 days of the retreat were the longest of my life. I went to every session. I ate every meal. I played the golf scramble on day 3. I watched my wife laugh at the welcome dinner that evening in a turquoise dress I had always liked. Watched her touch Stewart's arm once when she was making a point in conversation. Watched Beverly, his wife, refill her own wine glass across the table without noticing. I watched Beverly a lot those 2 days. She was a warm woman, easy to be around, the kind of person who always asked follow-up questions and remembered the answers. She asked me how my older daughter's pregnancy was going. She remembered that my daughter was expecting her second. I told her everything was fine. On the flight home, my wife fell asleep on my shoulder. I sat there 30,000 feet over the middle of the country, with her head on my shoulder, and 31 years between us, and I felt something I still don't have the right name for. It wasn't just anger. It was something older and quieter than anger. Something that felt like standing in a house you've lived in your whole life, and suddenly understanding that the walls are hollow. The first thing I did when I got home was call my attorney. Not a divorce attorney, just the man who had handled our estate planning for 15 years. A careful, old-fashioned lawyer who I trusted the way you trust someone who has seen your finances and doesn't judge you. I told him I needed a referral, and I told him why. He was quiet for a moment. Then he gave me a name. The divorce attorney's name was Constance. She had an office on Michigan Avenue. She was direct, slightly impatient, and clearly excellent at what she did. We met the following Thursday, while my wife was at a curriculum meeting at the school district where she worked. I brought 3 years of financial documents because Constance had told me to come prepared. What she found in those documents over the following 2 weeks was something I had not expected. There were transfers. Small ones. $200 here, $350 there, spaced out over about 14 months. The destination account was one I didn't recognize. When Constance traced it, it turned out to be a joint account opened in my wife's name and another name I didn't know. A woman's name. When we dug further, the woman's name turned out to be a shell, an LLC registered in Delaware, with no real business activity, that had received a total of just under $8,000 from our joint savings. I sat in Constance's office and looked at that number, $8,000, and felt something shift. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had planned this, small enough to not trigger alerts, spaced out enough to look like normal spending if you weren't paying attention. Someone had thought it through. I didn't confront my wife. Not yet. I moved money. Quietly, legally, with Constance's guidance. I protected what I could protect. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies. I contacted our financial advisor and reviewed every joint account. I did it slowly, over 3 weeks, while going to work every morning, coming home every evening, and living the life we had always lived. My wife never noticed. That told me something too. About 5 weeks after Scottsdale, Beverly called me. I almost didn't pick up. I'd been thinking about her every day since the retreat, and I hadn't known what I was going to say. But I picked up. "I know," she said before I could even get through a greeting. She wasn't crying. Her voice was flat and steady, the way a voice sounds when someone has already done their crying in private and is now in the part that comes after. "How long?" I asked her. "I'm not sure exactly. I found something in February. I think it started before that." "February was 10 months ago." "I'm sorry, Beverly," I said. "Don't be sorry. I'm calling because I think we should talk before either of us does anything. I have a situation that's more complicated than yours." Her situation was this. Stuart had a pension, a significant one, built up over 34 years with the firm. Their assets were deeply intertwined. She had not worked in 12 years. She had a daughter finishing her junior year at Northwestern. She needed to be strategic. I understood. We met for coffee the following Saturday at a place in Oak Park that neither of us had ever been to. She was smaller than I remembered, or maybe she just looked that way that day. She had a folder with her. She put it on the table. "I have talked to an attorney," she said. "I want to make sure that when this goes, it goes on our terms, not theirs." We were there for 2.5 hours. I am not a person who is ever trusted easily. 30 years in a profession where you learn to read people, where you sit across from clients who are presenting a version of themselves designed to secure a deal. You get careful. You learn to notice what people do with their hands when they're glossing over something. You learn which smiles are real. Beverly's was real. She was angry, and she was clear-eyed, and she was not going to let her husband's choices determine the rest of her life without a fight. I recognized something in that. I had felt it myself, alone in a hotel room with the air conditioning running too cold, staring at a ceiling. She asked me what I wanted. I thought about it honestly. "I want it to be over cleanly," I said. "I want what's mine. I want my kids not to be blindsided. And I want to do this once correctly." She nodded. "Same." We didn't coordinate. Her attorney made that clear later. 2 separate filings, 2 separate proceedings. But we had the same conversation in a coffee shop in Oak Park. And when we walked out to the parking lot an hour before noon, there was a kind of acknowledgement between us that I don't have a word for either. 2 people who had been living in parallel situations without knowing it, and who had decided on the same morning to stop pretending they weren't. I told my children before I filed. That was the hardest thing. Not the attorney's office. Not the attorney's office. Not reviewing the financials. Not even the night in Scottsdale. The hardest thing was sitting in my son's apartment with him and his fiancée, and on a separate night sitting with my older daughter and her husband at their kitchen table, and on a third night calling my youngest, who lives in Portland now, and saying the words out loud. They were not completely surprised. That surprised me. My oldest daughter said she had felt something was off for a while. My son asked 2 questions, got his answers, and then was quiet for a long time. My youngest cried and then said, "Dad, I'm glad you're not pretending." I don't know exactly what she meant by that, but it landed somewhere. My wife found out about the filing on a Tuesday morning. Constance's office served the papers. I was not home. I had gone to stay with my brother in Evanston the week prior, and I had taken with me what I needed, quietly, over a series of evenings when she was out. I left her the furniture. I left her the car she preferred. I took my father's things and my books and 31 years of photographs that I have not yet decided what to do with. She called me 4 times the day the papers arrived. I didn't pick up. Not out of cruelty. I had thought about what I would say if I answered, and I could not think of anything that needed to be said right then that wouldn't make things worse. There was nothing she was going to say that would change what I had seen in that hallway. There was nothing I was going to say that would make the transfer of $8,000 make sense. Some conversations don't need to happen in real time. Some of them can wait, or never happen at all. She texted me that evening. A long message. I read it once, completely, and then put my phone face down on my brother's kitchen table. I haven't read it again. The divorce took 11 months. It was not friendly, but it was not a war either. Constance was thorough. My wife had her own attorney, a man I never met. There were negotiations over the house, over the retirement accounts, over the details that accumulate when 2 people have been building something together for 3 decades. It was exhausting in the way that any long, careful process is exhausting. Not dramatic, just relentless. Stewart resigned from the firm 4 months in. The official reason given was pursuing other opportunities. The real reason, as Everett told me quietly over lunch, was that several things had come to light during the divorce proceedings. Beverly's attorney had been very thorough, and the firm had decided it was cleaner for everyone involved if Stewart moved on. He is, as far as I know, now working in consulting somewhere. I've not seen him since Scottsdale. The $8,000 was addressed in the settlement. Constance made sure of that. I live in a condo in Lincoln Park now, 15th floor, which I didn't think I wanted, and have come to realize I needed. The height, the light in the morning, the sense of having changed the coordinates of my life in some physical way that I can point to. I can see the lake from my kitchen window. I don't always look at it, but it's there. My son got married last June. I walked out of the ceremony next to my oldest daughter and her husband, and my youngest flew in from Portland and sat beside me during the reception and talked to me for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with any of this. A jazz trio played standards near the dance floor. I had a glass of bourbon and watched my son dance with his wife. I thought about 31 years. Not with grief, exactly. Something more complicated than grief. Something like taking stock. My wife was at the wedding. She sat on the opposite side. We did not speak. When our eyes met once, briefly, across the room, she looked away first. I have thought about that moment a few times since. I'm not sure what I was expecting. Maybe nothing. Maybe I had stopped expecting things from her the night I stood in a corridor in Scottsdale and watched her smile at me like I was a minor inconvenience she had already planned for. There's something that happens when you're on the other side of something like this. Not just a marriage ending, but the specific kind of ending where you understand that you were living in a version of your life that was not entirely real. It doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like standing in a room after the furniture's been moved. You keep reaching for things that aren't where they used to be. But after a while, you stop reaching. Everett came to visit me in Lincoln Park last winter. We had dinner and then we sat on my balcony and watched the city for a while without saying much. At some point he said, "How are you actually doing?" I thought about it. The way you think about it when someone who actually knows you asks. "Better," I said. "Not fixed, but better." He nodded. "You know what helped me the most?" I said. He waited, stopping trying to understand it. I paused. I spent months trying to figure out why. When it started, what I missed, whether I could have seen it earlier, and at some point I realized that knowing the answers to those questions wasn't going to get me back anything. It was just going to keep me standing in that hallway. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good, I'm 63 now. I go to work. I talk to my kids most weeks. I have started running again, something I hadn't done in 15 years, and I do it in the mornings along the lake path when it's still early enough that the light is low and the city is quiet. I am not a person who is built for grand declarations or dramatic reinvention. I'm a project manager. I solve problems by making them smaller and more specific, by identifying what you actually control and what you don't. What I control is what I do tomorrow, and the day after that. Beverly and I had coffee again a few months ago. First time since Oak Park. Her daughter just graduated from Northwestern. She looked well, tired in a way that was starting to lift, like someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time and has only recently set it down. We talked for about an hour, nothing heavy, nothing about them. Just two people who had been through something similar and had come out the other side and were figuring out, separately and in parallel, what the other side looked like. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, she said, "Thank you for that day in Oak Park. I needed to know I wasn't alone in it." "You weren't?" I said. "Neither were you," she said. She drove away. I stood there for a minute in the cold. November in Chicago. The wind off the lake, the sky already going gray at 4 in the afternoon. I had nowhere I needed to be right then. No meeting, no call, no deadline. I stood there a minute longer than I needed to. I think that's the part I didn't expect. Not the pain, which I'd prepared for in some vague way, and not the process, which Constance had walked me through step by step. What I didn't expect was the quiet, the specific kind of quiet that shows up when you stop filling every hour with the machinery of a life you built for someone else's version of you. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives one morning and you notice you slept through the night and the light is coming in through the kitchen window the way it always does. And you put on the coffee and you think, not with joy, not yet, but with something honest and clear, all right, let's see what's next. I've thought about cause and effect a lot since Scottsdale. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the ordinary version of it, the one that shows up when you sit quietly enough and trace things back to where they actually started. What happened to me didn't come out of nowhere. It never does. Stuart didn't become the man who stood in that hotel room because of one weak moment. My wife didn't smile at me in that corridor, calm, rehearsed, ready, because something spontaneous had just occurred. These things build quietly over months or years in the small choices people make when they think no one is paying attention. The $8,000 didn't move itself. Those transfers happened one at a time on ordinary Tuesday afternoons by someone who had decided that what we had built together was a resource to be managed rather than a life to be lived. I'm not angry about that anymore. I was for a long time. But anger at a thing that's already finished is just energy with nowhere useful to go. What I think about more now is what I chose, because I made choices too, and they mattered. I chose not to react in that hallway. I chose to call Constance before I said a word to my wife. I chose to tell my children the truth directly before the paperwork arrived because they deserved to hear it from me and not from a legal document or rumor. Those choices didn't feel heroic at the time. They felt like the only things I could control when everything else was coming apart. But I think they were the difference between walking out of that year with my dignity intact and walking out of it with a longer trail of damage behind me. Everett told me once, this was years before any of this happened, that the measure of a person isn't what they do when things are going well. Anyone can be decent when nothing's at stake. The measure is what you do in the hours after something like a hotel corridor at 2 in the morning, when you're shaking inside and no one would blame you for burning the whole thing down. I think about Beverly too when I think about this. She had every reason to fall apart. Instead, she made a folder, called an attorney, and met me in a parking lot in Oak Park with clear eyes and a plan. That's not luck. That's a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with what you studied in school. The intelligence of knowing what actually matters and refusing to let your worst moment define every moment that follows. The people who hurt us were not stupid. They were careless in a different way. Careless about consequences, about other people, about the weight that deception adds to a life over time. And that carelessness cost them. Not because the universe was keeping score, but because the way you treat the people closest to you eventually becomes the shape of the life you're living. You can manage the appearance of a thing for a while. You cannot manage it forever. I'm 63. I run in the mornings. I have coffee with my son most Sundays. I watched my oldest daughter hold her second child for the first time last spring, and I thought, this is real. This is what was always real. The rest of it, the part that fell apart, that was the part built on things that couldn't hold weight. I didn't get here by being strong in any way I would have recognized before. I got here by being honest about what I saw, careful about what I did next, and willing to let go of a version of my life that had already let go of me. That's all it was, and somehow that was enough.